Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Beyond 6 Seconds. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel, and I'm really excited to be here today with my guest, Julia Ward. She is an actor and filmmaker based in New York and a senior in high school. She's president of her high school drama club, in which she has both starred in and directed productions. She's also appeared in independent films, as well as the horror film Trick, and has interned at Rome Pictures, an award-winning film production company. Through her award-winning documentary film, In.clu.sion, she's been recognized for her work in raising awareness about the authentic representation of people with disabilities in the media. Julia, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So happy to have you here, and I'm so excited to talk to you about your latest documentary film that you filmed over the past year, 2020. So first off, how did you get the inspiration to film In.clu.sion?
Well, I'm one of 4 children. I'm actually the only daughter. And my youngest brother, Spencer, he was born with 2 brain malformations and a handful of other disabilities. He's 13 years old as of last December, but he has the needs of more like a toddler. He really requires me and my family to help take care of him and stuff. I mean, he's my brother, we love him. He's a part of the family. And growing up in rural New York, I've really come to realize that people don't accept him the way that we do. They don't see him the same way that we see him. They don't see him as a person. They just kind of they see him as this, I don't even know, this otherworldly being. Not like that, but he's not a person the way that he is to our family. And it really what really ticked me off was, I want to say it was last January, maybe February, right before the shutdown. I was at a school event. My mom was helping out. Spencer was with us because we bring him to stuff because he's part of the family. And I was pushing him around, and a friend came up to me. She knows me. She knows my family. She's met Spencer plenty of times, interacted with him plenty of times. She looked at me and she's like, "You're using him for attention." And I was like, I know. I was like, "Excuse me?" And I was just in that moment, I was so upset with her, but I was just no, and walked away. And that just it bothered me so much. And I was like, how could someone think like that? How can someone, especially someone who knows us, who knows Spencer? I mean, she's, given plenty of hugs to Spencer. She's played with Spencer sometimes when she's been over. How can she look at him and just be like, "Yo, he's just an object. You're just using him." I'm like, what is going on? And that kind of got me thinking about, life in rural New York and how people interact with him. When we go to the mall, people are staring. And it's not just little kids staring. Little kids will stare because they're unused to it, and they're curious. They see, a big kid being pushed around in this strange stroller, and they're like, "What? Mom, what's that?" But adults, people who are old enough that they should be able to know what's going on and should be like, "Yep, this is just life." And so I was just thinking about how, the people around us respond to Spencer, respond to our family. And I was just so frustrated. And I thought kind of back to, I believe the show premiered not last September, but the September before, Stumptown on ABC, and how one of the main characters on the show, he's the younger brother of the protagonist, Ansel, he has Down syndrome. And he's played by an actor with Down syndrome, Cole Sibus. And I remember watching the show for the first time and being like, "Oh my gosh." I was watching with my mom. I'm like, "Does he have Down syndrome?" I'm like, this is awesome. A character on this huge show for a huge channel has Down syndrome. And it's not just that he's a character with his own, emotions, wants, desires, storylines, and relationships outside of that relationship with his sister. I'm like, that's so amazing. But as time went on, I was just like, why is that exciting? Why am I getting excited to see that on television? And so I kind of put those two events together, that people aren't seeing people with disabilities in the entertainment media. And I think that has sort of an effect on how they go around the real world, because they're not used to seeing it in their everyday life, and then they're not used to seeing it on television and in movies and in books and all that stuff. And so that's kind of what got me going in making inclusion. And so that's what inspired me to really reach out to, these people who work for, inclusion,
Mhm.
including people and all this stuff.
Yeah, one incredible thing about it, inclusion is that you did reach out to different people. You got a very well-known director, Peter
Uh-huh.
Farrelly, and two, amazing actors. You got Cole Sybus, who you just mentioned, and
Hmm.
Matt Fraser. And I'd imagine filming, in quarantine, because you filmed this in 2020, and just, all the challenges with that. So how did you reach out to the actors and the director to be interviewed? What was that like?
So like during quarantine, I'm gonna be honest, during online school, I would have like one tab open with my classes and stuff. And then like I would have another tab open, kind of like looking stuff up. I looked around, I tried to find like their managers and stuff. And then like once I found like their names, I looked for their contact information and I just emailed them. I was like, hey, I told them, I'm Julia. I have my youngest brother, Spencer. He has special needs. And I just explained what I wanted to do and how I think that their work is so important. And I think that I would love to interview them for the project. And it was shocking to get responses. I want to say that Peter Farrell was the first one to get back to me. I It might have been like I interviewed also two authors. I interviewed Jason Vale and Rhea Fry.
Mhm.
And I'm putting those like on like my website, and I'm actually putting them in my school newspaper. This month I'm putting up the interview with Jason Vale. But I I was like, Peter Farrell was the first one to get back to me, and I was like playing a video game with Spencer when I got the email through, and I was like, and I shut off the Xbox and I like ran upstairs and I'm like, oh my gosh. But it was just like it was like just I was like, okay, here are the managers. Here goes nothing. I'm gonna email them,
Yeah.
see what happens. And actually, Peter Farley was the one who gave me the contact information for Matt Fraser after I interviewed him.
Mhm.
He was like, I think that Matt you should really interview Matt Fraser. I think that he's a great person to talk to about this. And I was like, okay, yes, I'll interview him. Thank you.
Oh, it's great to have that warm introduction. No, that is
I know.
fantastic, and it's so wonderful that they got back to you because clearly all three of those Peter Farrelly and Cole and Matt are very involved in depictions of disability in film, and
Mhm.
some because they have disabilities, and others because that's just Peter Farrelly saying that that's sort of who he grew up with in the
Yeah.
neighborhood, was just used to seeing all kinds of people and wanted them represented in the films that he created.
Mhm.
Oh, fantastic. So, I mean, tell me a little bit about it, inclusion. Like I've seen it. It's on Amazon Prime. It's an incredible film. It's a great short documentary, and it really highlights a lot of issues that I feel like haven't really been well addressed in the media about the representation of people with disabilities. So, tell me, what was your process for how to put that together and highlight some of those issues?
Well, I had a list of things that I wanted to address with everyone, and just how inclusion fits with their life story
Mhm.
and why they think that that's important for others to see it. Because I mean, that was my whole process going along, just that sort of creating that acceptance that we already have
Mhm.
because we know it, we've lived it, but also putting that on the screen so that others can have that, and making sure that it was authentic. And I wanted to include that in the documentary, the fact that representation ideally should be authentic. It ideally should be, actors and actresses who do have those disabilities. Because I find a lot that if it's not, if they don't have that disability, sometimes it isn't that great. I mean, look at what happened with Sia's movie Music.
Yeah.
It was very, she said that she auditioned autistic actors or actresses actually for the role. And I think she said something where she just couldn't work with them. It was something like that. I don't Those weren't her exact words, but what ended up happening with the movie was people were like, this isn't very accurate. There's some like offensive things in this movie when it comes to representing autistic people. And so that was kind of the approach I wanted to take. I wanted to take an approach of not only creating or having this inclusion so that other people can see it and get their own acceptance, but making sure that inclusion is accurate
Mhm.
and that representation isn't just like a facade. It's just non-disabled people being like, oh, we're putting a disabled character in here,
Right.
making sure that it's really heartfelt. There's more behind it.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things I think you open your film with it is that a lot of the representation of people with disabilities in media has been very stereotypical. So either they're like a very perfect character that's almost, doesn't really exist in the world in general in
Mhm.
humanity, or they're the villain. Traditionally we think of Richard III, which I know Matt Fraser, having played that role, talks about it quite a lot in his feelings about playing that role. So yeah, definitely just the whole concept of, and you talk about this with Peter Farrelly, just having a person with disabilities in a role, not because they're disabled, just because they're a person and they can have traits that are independent of their disability, just like any other human being. And
Mhm.
it seems so simple, but in a lot of ways it's groundbreaking. You don't see that a lot in media.
Mhm.
What was it like making this film in quarantine? Like, I'd imagine in some ways you still have access to interview people because you can do it over
Mhm.
Zoom or over the internet. But was it more challenging? Because you're a filmmaker, so you've been making films before this. Was it challenging, kind of switching to making your film completely at home?
I think that if it wasn't for the pandemic, I don't know if I would have been able to do it,
Mhm.
because I think when the pandemic hit, everyone switched to Zoom, and I think that a lot of these people had some free time on their hands. So
Mhm.
me reaching out, they were like, "Yeah, I'm free. I can interview with this kid." I think that had it not been for the pandemic, I don't know if it would have happened or if it would have played out the way it did. I don't know if I would have been able to interview Peter Farley
Yeah.
or Matt Fraser or Cole Sivis. So I think that it did pose a challenge. It posed a challenge when it came to like, trying to like record the meeting. Some people wanted to do Skype, having to figure out how to record Skype,
Mhm.
and just having to like bounce around and learn the quirks of, these new programs, because honestly, no one knew how to use Zoom at that point, pretty much.
Mhm.
Everyone was still figuring it out. So it was definitely, there were a couple of hurdles, but I think that I don't want to say I'm grateful for the pandemic because I'm not, but I think had it not been for it, I don't know if inclusion would be here today.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, it's interesting how our digital world and learning all of these tools. I feel like everybody's pretty well versed in Zoom now overall. But you're right.
Mhm.
In the beginning, I think actually a lot of podcasters knew about Zoom because it was an affordable way to
Mhm.
record audio. But it was interesting when everybody else kind of wound up moving over about a
Mhm.
year ago to Zoom. And imagine
A
there's
lot of updates now.
exactly. It's so much has changed and so much of our world is digital, and it
Mhm.
makes sense that the filmmaking is too. So when did Inclusion get released? It was pretty recent, is that correct?
Yeah, I want to say it was mid to late October.
Mhm. Right, and it was Amazon Prime, was that the main release area?
Mhm. Amazon Prime.
Very cool. So what kind of feedback have you received about the film so far?
I've received from the people who've watched the documentary, I've definitely received, it's pretty much all been positive. I
Mhm.
mean, I don't actually, I'm going to say it has all been positive for the documentary, but I I create on social media and I've posted a couple videos, about like representation and stuff.
Mhm.
And the response on social media has been terrible.
Really?
And I know. It's like it's so surprising to me because I feel like this is a message that everyone could get behind, and it could
Mhm.
just be I'm very like naive in that way, but I feel like this is something that I feel like everyone should at least get behind.
Mhm.
So I've seen less inclusion people being negative, but definitely on for like other things, I've been like called terrible things. I've gotten like threats. I'm like, this is a pretty like I don't want to say a pretty basic concept, but like I don't think that saying that there should be more representation of people with disabilities should be like controversial. And I
Right.
think that was so surprising because I feel like with the documentary, I was just like, oh, everyone's on board. It's so lovely. And then I took it to social media and I'm like, oh my, like it was shocking. I'm like, okay, I knew that some people are not, obviously if they're not used to disabled people, they may not be like super comfortable. I feel like that should have gotten like, I don't know, like just uploading and saying that there should be more characters with disabilities, characters with disabilities should be played by people with disabilities. The like insane response, that was like a slap in the face.
Oh yeah, as you said, I wouldn't think that would be such a controversial topic.
You know?
Wow. Well, that's it. Yeah, I mean, clearly have a long way to go with things like this, but wow, my goodness. So, I mean, I guess what kind of impact do you want to have, or would you like this film to have on the media? I mean, clearly from the response in social media, there's a lot of room to have an impact on just society in general and their views of people with disabilities in media. But sort of what impact are you looking to have with your film?
And obviously, I mean, I hope that in the future we're going to see more representation, more accurate representation. I mean, I already know, has nothing to do with the documentary because they casted it before, but I know like I want to say it's coming out this year, but I know that Marvel's Eternals, they're having a deaf hero, which is so cool. I'm like, now all these kids who watch like, like Spider-Man, Iron Man, the Avengers movies, they're going to go see Eternals and they're going to see a deaf superhero, which is so awesome. But I just hope that people watch it and they see that there's a problem and they see that there's change that's needed and they realize that maybe behaviors that they haven't realized are, or I shouldn't say behaviors that they have. I hope that they realize that there is more and that their eyes are opened and the fact that there is a problem and that even if there's not going to be, disabled characters on every show and movie, I hope that they realize that there is a need, and I hope that they realize that even if that need isn't fulfilled, they know that, I don't want to say they know that disabled people exist, but they still become more adjusted and more accepting.
Yeah. And I think, one of the central points, I think, of your film is to just seeing disabled people in different roles in media, just people kind of used to seeing it on TV, just like, every other change that's happened in film and media around representation, the more you see it and it just becomes more and more typical in terms of what you see on screen. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So yeah, I mean, you are a filmmaker and you've made this really important film. Have you submitted it to like film festivals or other things?
It was in the New York Women in Film and Television, I want to say their online shorts fest. It was featured in some newsletters. I mean, obviously the Seven Sisters newsletter. There's another film festival that's happening in March. It's like socially relevant film festivals. I feel like there's another word in there I'm forgetting. So I'm entering it into film festivals. Obviously, it's being featured in newsletters that I've been like, hey, like, this is something that I did. So I'm just trying to enter into things, get, like the widest audience possible, just to kind of like have people see this. And in November, actually, I received a New York State Senate proclamation from Senator Jen Metzger commending the work on the film and just raising awareness in general.
Wow, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. What other kind of films do you want to make in the future?
Well, I plan to go into like acting, but I do want to work on films and help. I mean, you can't just be an actress these days. I mean, really, no one's just an actress. But I obviously, like, as I go to college and when I'm done with college, I want to work on films that do have accurate representation. I want to help do that because, I mean, if no one else is going to do it, I mean, I don't know what the scene's going to look like in 5 years or even like next summer, but that's what I plan on like working on and doing. Just like, I don't want to say normal films, but stuff that has disabled characters in that accurate way without being like, look, there's disabled characters, everyone take a look at this in a natural way, like all those great examples.
Right. That's fantastic. Yeah. I think just sort of, bringing it into, making it something that's very commonly seen, just part of the
Mhm.
overall media landscape is a great way to approach it. Oh,
Mhm.
fantastic. So where can people find inclusion? And, we'll put the links in the show notes to the link on Amazon Prime, but where can people find out more about it? And are there other channels that people can kind of look at or connect with you or connect with the film?
I mean, obviously the biggest one is Amazon Prime. That's where you can find the documentary. Obviously, like I said, I create on like social media, like TikTok, by all that stuff. That stuff's less. I mean, it is inclusion. It is about, but it's also like other serious topics. It's also a lot of like comedic stuff because that's like what I started with social media
Mhm.
doing. But yeah, I think Amazon Prime is obviously the biggest one. And I don't know, maybe they'll find a newsletter that has it featured in it.
Wonderful. Yep. So I will put the Amazon Prime link in the show
Mhm.
notes so people can check it out. And yeah, it's a really great, powerful film. And yeah, I thank you for making that film and doing the work and sharing it with the world. And I'm certainly hoping that society gets a lot more open soon. We're having so much open dialogue now about representation and equality and justice, just, certainly on a racial and economic level. And I'm hoping that extends to all forms of diversity and
Mhm.
inclusion and equity. And I think this is an important part of the conversation as well.
Mhm.
Very good. So, as we close out, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know or anything else they can help or support you with?
I mean, just take away, like what's important here, not allowing what you haven't been introduced to, or you haven't been exposed to create, this unfamiliarity, if that's a word. um, don't allow that to cloud your mind and create judgment, because I mean, Spencer's a person, my family, we're all people, and you may not be familiar with someone with, a genesis of the corpus callosum or dandy walker syndrome, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. That doesn't mean that they don't have feelings. That doesn't mean anything.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely important message to, just just expand your experiences and realize our common shared humanity. Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for being on my podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.